honor to have Professor Carl Landwehr with us today for the first keynote. Carl is a fellow of the IEEE and also one of the first class of inductees in the National Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. So, welcome. And he's currently the lead research scientist at George Washington's Cybersecurity Research Institute, and also a visiting chair professor at Illinois College, where he teaches a very interesting course, which is titled Cybersecurity for Future Presidents. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And Carl has a very distinguished 35-year career in various agencies, including the National Science Foundation, where I believe he was instrumental in starting the Cyber Trust program, as it was called then, and now it's called Security and Trustworthy Computing. So, and also spent some time at Naval Research Laboratory, Iwspa, and others. So it's a great pleasure to have you, Carl. Please go ahead.
So thank you very much for that kind introduction. I actually am honored to be here because it's more than 4 years now since I stopped being a source of money for researchers. So have people still interested in what you want to say after you're not giving them money anymore? I take that as a compliment. So thanks very much for having me. And it's always nice to come back to New Orleans, even if it's a little damp. And to see old friends and make new friends. So thanks for inviting me. I would actually be glad to talk about my course at some point, but we'll see how long this lasts. One of the things that I've been doing over the past few years is, well, I now have the privilege of doing things that I want to do, not necessarily things that I get paid to do. So one of the things I've been interested in is privacy, and so that's what this talk is going to focus on. It's not a technical talk, okay, so don't expect that. But it's a talk to try to, at this point in my life, I'm trying to persuade other people to do things. So I'm going to try to persuade you all to do some things anyway. And in case you have other things on your mind or whatever, this is the whole talk, okay? Basically, I want to say that privacy is not dead, contrary to popular comments by some people, but in some respects it's ailing. I think data analytics, which is the topic of this particular workshop as I understand it, promises some substantial societal benefits. Gaining those benefits, I think, depends on access to some personally identifiable data. Haven't seen too much of that sort of thing in the session that I've been in so far, but it certainly happens even in cybersecurity data analytics. So I think maintaining trust between the data subjects, the people whose data we're looking at, and the people who are doing the analysis is essential. And I think that trust can be maintained through a sort of a social contract, which I'll put up in a bit. And to enable that social contract, I think we need some research in areas of computer science, and so that's what I'm, I suppose, trying to persuade you that you ought to think about doing. So that's it. You can leave now if you want to. So what's this workshop about? As I understand it, it's about how we can apply data analytics to improve security and privacy of computer systems and networks. And I'm hoping that that's more or less the general topic intended. I think that means applying data analytics to large streams of data, which may include sensitive information. Okay, you often are looking at cybersecurity data analytics, you're looking at streams of data that are generated by users, they've got machine IDs we were just hearing about, and so on, that are related to individuals. You could trace back to individuals. And in fact, you may be, how many people have heard of the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015? Heard of that? At least one. Okay, so this is a. So I live in the Washington D.C. area, so I'm permeated with legislation and politics, I suppose, without I want to or not. But yes, so this has been in the works for 4 years, okay, and it's been a constant struggle, and the real struggle has been about privacy. It's been between privacy advocates saying, hey, the idea behind it in general is very, modest one, better off if we could share data about vulnerabilities and attacks between the private sector and the government, and hopefully, to me, it's, all this data is really going to tell you is which way should you done. Okay, but so it's really not at the level of what I like to see, which is building systems that are stronger. But anyway, the question about sharing data involves, okay, we're going to share this data. It might have people's passwords or identities or preferences in it. Is there a problem with that from a privacy standpoint? Well, yes, there is. And so that's been a big issue for negotiating between, okay, are the companies that share this data going to be protected against liability for sharing it with the government? And the answer in 4 years is yes, they get some liability protection, but they also have some requirements to move sensitive information from the data streams. So that's how that balance eventually worked out, and they have some reporting requirements. So they have effects on civil liberties, presumably Congress will get a report on it. So that passed as part of the omnibus budget bill, which is why you may not have noticed it. It's part of a huge chunk of legislation. Yeah, it took 4 years. Okay, so I think one of the first things that always comes up is in discussions about privacy is what is it? And in many cases, people you really don't want to go there because you're going to have an all-day discussion about what privacy is, and you may or may not agree at the end of the day anyhow. And so people will just say, well, privacy is not something we can really define closely. It's some call it a fundamentally contested concept. But I want to actually, I read an interesting paper recently which I want to tell you about, which was not from the computer science world, but from the law journal world, that takes another position. So, and this is actually based in my course a little bit. If you remember from, if you went to school in this country, you may have studied the Constitution, and the Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, homes, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures should not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by no direct information, in particular describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So how did that get in our Constitution? Well, it got in because in the colonial era, the British were doing the following, and this wasn't just here, they did it in Britain as well. They had these things called writs of assistance, which basically gave government agents the right to search anything they wanted, wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, looking for contraband. So smuggling was an issue in the colonies, and so people in the colonies were subject to these writs of assistance, and basically somebody could knock on your door and say, show me your stuff at any time of the day or night. So that wasn't very popular. And in fact,
but it's still there.
In Britain, I don't know.
And no, in the US.
No, it isn't.
The all Brits.
We talk about that. We'll talk about that. I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer, okay? And I'm not an expert on that. But that's a slightly different thing.
It is slightly different, but it's show us your stuff.
Okay, we'll have a good discussion. So the writs of assistance, though, had to do with searching places for things. Okay, didn't really have to do with information. But now it's 200 years later, plus 250 almost. And so the question is, how do you interpret this? If that's what, this is in the Constitution, usually the word privacy doesn't appear, okay? It doesn't appear in the Bill of Rights either. But this is where most privacy arguments go back to, okay? And that's what, so that's what I want to tell you about this paper, that argues that there is a fundamental concept of privacy, and it comes about, this guy, David Sklansky, and I'll give you the reference to the paper later. He says it does make sense to try to define privacy. And that the basis of privacy is really in the notions of sovereign space and enclosement in a zone or a sphere of personal sovereignty. So the idea is, whatever, everyone wants a place they can sort of retreat to occasionally and be alone. You go home at night, you want to think your thoughts at home. You don't want to be subject to unreasonable monitoring at that point. If you don't have a home, you need some other place to go. So that's sort of the sovereign space idea. Enclosement is just the idea that, in fact, actually, as Bruce Schneier said it recently, someone said, is privacy dead? He said, well, we're all still wearing clothes. And if you think about strip searches and that sort of thing, that's very much an invasion of privacy, okay, the physical physical body, and that's been taken into account in some legal decisions as well. So he argues privacy is not necessarily also something that people have, it's something that resides in how people treat each other. So it's a form of respect. So you have a place of refuge, a home, the body. Even David Brin, who's the science fiction author who wrote this Transparent Society book that's been fairly influential, arguing that really we're going to have cameras everywhere, and so we should all be able to see all of them. Even he says, we want a zone of sanctuary where we can feel unobserved. So violations of privacy then, under this sort of definition of privacy, would be things like intrusion into a place of refuge, barging into your home, but also strip searches, or and in terms of this question about respect, being accosted by a policeman on the street. Okay, that's in a sense a violation of privacy. So this is Slansky's words. We can provisionally define privacy as respect for a personal sphere shielded, but not completely immune from public inspection and regulation. So still your house can be invaded if there's a warrant that's issued on probable cause in this country. And I should say, I'm really speaking as a U.S. person here, so we'll have other people who can certainly enlighten me about other countries, and I'll be happy to be enlightened.
Let me just comment. What the Fourth Amendment talks about is government actions. It has nothing to do with action by anybody else, which of course if you go to the European Union, you have far more concern with what happens with other corporations and other people to you than government.
Yes, but in terms of physical trespass, of course, right. The random person can't barge into my house because that would be trespass, but keep it locked. But again, when you apply these in cyberspace, it's an interesting exercise. Okay, so that's the reference for that. I'll have it at the end. So this is just okay. Is privacy dead? No, it's still working. So I think we have that. Okay, so that's he argues that that's the basis really for privacy, and that we've become obsessed with what he refers to, and other people do as well, as informational privacy, which is really a subpart of that. It's privacy of the information about you. Okay, and so informational privacy is concerned with the flows of information about oneself, and the person that I found most informative on this, and there are lots of other people writing. Okay, I don't want to say that this is the only one, but Helen Nissenbaum of NYU has written a variety of papers starting more than 10 years ago on privacy as contextual integrity. Okay, and the idea, it's a kind of a hard to parse initially, at least it was for me, but the idea is just this, that we reveal information to people within a context. So if I'm in a store and I buy something from the shopkeeper, he knows what I'm buying. Okay, if I go to my doctor and I have a medical exam, I'm open about my medical information with my doctor. If I go to my lawyer and I talk about my legal problems, I have confidence that he's going to retain that information. It's when we have a sense of privacy violation is when information from one of those contexts suddenly shows up where we didn't expect it in another context. And so that's a violation of, if you will, contextual integrity. The context of that information is somehow changed. And so that's a notion of privacy informational privacy that I find seems to help. So now I just have a few sort of observations from all the various meetings I've been to about privacy in the last couple of years. And there's one group of privacy advocates will really feel you should have total control over information about yourself. I think that's basically not feasible anymore, because there is, in fact, there are cameras out there on the street in Europe, lots of cameras, and you don't have any real way of, you can wear a mask, I guess, but I don't see many people doing that. And we have, easy pass to track vehicle movement. We have cell phones that track us all over the place. And so I think unless you're willing to forego a tremendous number of modern conveniences, you're not going to be able